Could you have seen this boy in this area? Do you come here regularly? Is it possible you've seen
On
this
September
boy?
14th, 2007, a boy stepped off a train at King's Cross Station. He was 14 years old. His name was Andrew Gosden. Security cameras captured him walking through the station concourse. Then the footage ends. No one has ever proven where he went next, but investigators later discovered something deeply strange about the journey that brought him there. When Andrew bought his ticket that morning in Doncaster, the clerk offered him a return. It would have cost only a few pounds more. Andrew declined. He chose a one-way ticket, and that single decision has shaped every theory about what happened to him. He was never seen again. Not the note-leaving boy who told his parents where he was going. Not the 14-year-old with the band patches on his satchel and the strong prescription glasses and the PlayStation Portable he carried everywhere. Not a body, not a single belonging. Nothing surfaced, nothing was found. 17 years passed, and the ground under that morning still has not stopped shifting. If you have ever encountered this case before and thought you understood it, stay with me, because the question this episode is built around is not what happened to Andrew Gosden. It is something far more disturbing. It is this: what does a boy have to be carrying inside him, silently, invisibly, for the people who loved him most to have no idea that any of this was coming? If that question already has you, subscribe now and make sure you do not miss a single episode of Cold Case Redacted. Hit the bell. Let's begin. To understand what happened on the 14th of September 2007, you have to understand the world Andrew Gosden lived in before that morning. Not the outline of it, the texture of it. Because the details matter here more than in almost any other case this channel has covered. Andrew Paul Gosden was born on the 10th of July, 1993, in Doncaster, a city in South Yorkshire in the north of England. He grew up in a Victorian terrace house in Balby, a quiet residential suburb, with his parents Kevin and Glenys and his older sister Charlotte. Kevin and Glenys were both speech therapists. Their household was, by every available account, warm, stable, and intellectually engaged. The family took holidays together to Egypt and Tunisia. They had dinner as a family every evening. They talked. They argued about ideas. They left doors open. Kevin Gosden was the kind of father who did puzzles with his teenage son on a Thursday evening and thought nothing unusual about it. The night before Andrew vanished, the two of them sat together and worked through a puzzle, then washed the dishes side by side after dinner. Kevin gave Andrew a quick hug and said, "I love you," before Andrew went to bed. He has since described that moment as something he holds on to, something irreplaceable. Andrew's room tells you a great deal about who he was. His bed was positioned near a shelf displaying a prized gem collection. His school blazer and tie hung on the back of his chair every evening, placed there by habit and by care. His books were well read, not decorative. He had a half-sized snooker table in his room. He played Xbox in the converted cellar. He was deeply, self-sufficiently content in solitude, not because he was withdrawn in a damaged sense, but because his internal world was rich enough to sustain him. Teachers described him consistently as one of the most intellectually gifted students they had encountered. He was enrolled in the National Association for Gifted and Talented Youth, a government scheme for the top 5% of students nationwide. His teachers believed he was on a direct path to Oxford or Cambridge. Andrew himself found school frustrating, not because it was hard, but because it was easy. Too easy. He described it as not challenging enough. He wanted more. The summer before he disappeared, he attended a residential program at Cambridge University, a summer school for high-achieving students. His father later recalled that Andrew came home from Cambridge noticeably different. More animated, more talkative, excited about what he had seen. For a boy who typically said very little about school, this was something. And yet, for all his intellectual sophistication, Andrew Gosden was, in the ways that mattered most for what was about to happen, very young. He had no mobile phone. His previous phones had been barely used before being lost or abandoned. When his phone broke a few weeks before he disappeared, he asked for an Xbox instead of a replacement. He had no email address. He had no social media presence. Facebook and MySpace existed, but Andrew had no accounts with either. His PlayStation Portable had online capabilities, but checks with Sony confirmed that no account had ever been created for him on the network. The forensic examination of every device he had access to, his sister's laptop, the family home computer, school computers, the local Doncaster library machines, found nothing. No contact with strangers, no secret communications, no evidence that he had been talking to anyone outside his small circle of trusted friends. He was, in technological terms, almost entirely invisible to the world beyond Balby. And the world beyond Balby was almost entirely invisible to him. There is something important to sit with here before we go any further. Andrew Gosden was not a naive child in the way that word is sometimes used dismissively. He was intensely perceptive. He read philosophy. He was drawn to the work of Friedrich Nietzsche, whose writing on individual freedom and the rejection of conventional paths resonated with him. He watched a British sitcom called The Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin, about a man who fakes his own death to escape the routine of his ordinary life. These were not accidental interests. They were a map of something Andrew was working through privately, some interior dialogue about who he was and what he wanted that he had not yet brought into the open. He was also a boy who looked younger than he was. He stood around 5'3", slight build, light brown hair that swept across his face, thick-lensed prescription glasses for severe myopia, deaf in his left ear, which sometimes made it difficult for him to locate the source of a sound in a noisy environment, a distinctive double ridge on his upper right ear, a unique anatomical feature that would later become one of the primary identifiers investigators used in the search for him. He wore band t-shirts, Slipknot, Him, Muse, Evanescence, Dragon Force. His satchel was covered in patches that he and Charlotte had sewn on together. The satchel said more about who he was in the world than almost anything else. It was a billboard of membership, a declaration that even though he mostly kept to himself, he belonged somewhere. The week of his disappearance, that satchel went with him to London. Now we need to examine the days immediately before Andrew vanished, because those days contain something that has never been fully explained, something that functions, in retrospect, as a kind of blueprint. The school year had just returned from summer holidays. It was early September 2007. Andrew was beginning year 10, which meant the start of GCSE study. For a student of Andrew's caliber, this should have been straightforward. His teachers expected him to sail through. On Thursday, the 13th of September, the day before he disappeared, Andrew left school early. He walked home alone, arriving at around 1 in the afternoon. His parents were at work. Charlotte was home. She later told reporters that Andrew seemed entirely normal, relaxed, cheerful. He went to his room, played Xbox, listened to music. The family ate dinner together that evening. No argument, no distress, nothing unusual. We do not know why Andrew left school early on the 13th. That fact has never been explained. It remains an open question. What we do know is that it was the first deviation in a routine that had otherwise been flawless. And what we know about human behavior in the lead-up to significant decisions is that small breaks from established patterns are rarely random. They are rehearsals. They are tests. They are the first quiet steps of something already in motion. Andrew woke on the 14th slightly irritable and slow to get up. His mother noted both of these things. They were out of character for a boy who was typically steady in the mornings. By 8 in the morning, he had dressed in his school uniform and set off from the house. He walked toward the school bus stop, but at a petrol station nearby, he stopped at the cash machine and withdrew £200, almost everything in his account. He left £14. Then he walked back home, changed out of his school uniform into jeans and a black Slipknot t-shirt, packed his canvas satchel with his wallet, his keys, and his PlayStation Portable. Left the PSP charger behind, left his jacket behind, despite September temperatures that dropped sharply in the evenings, left the £100 in birthday money sitting untouched in his bedroom drawer, left the emergency bus fare cash that the family kept in a box, and walked to Doncaster railway station. This sequence of decisions is the psychological architecture of what followed. Every choice he made that morning has been examined repeatedly over 17 years, and every choice carries weight. Let me walk through it precisely. He withdrew £200 but left everything else. He took the money he had earned or saved, not money given to him. The birthday cash was untouched. Why? One interpretation is that he intended to be home before it was needed and therefore didn't think to take it. Another is that the birthday money felt like a return journey and he didn't plan to make one. A third is that it was not his to spend in the context of whatever he was planning. Each interpretation points somewhere different, and none of them can be ruled out. He left his jacket. Andrew's family later pointed to this as evidence that he intended to be home by evening. A 14-year-old boy who understood that London in September got cold after dark would not have left without a jacket unless he expected to be indoors or back home before the temperature dropped. But he also left the PSP charger. If you are going somewhere for a day, you don't need the charger. If you are going somewhere for longer, you do. Leaving both the jacket and the charger simultaneously gives two readings that point in opposite directions. He bought a one-way ticket. This is the detail that has anchored every discussion of Andrew Gosden for 17 years. The ticket seller remembered him clearly. She remembered because he looked young to be traveling alone. She remembered because she offered him a return ticket, explained that it cost only around 50 pence more, and Andrew declined. Not passively, he specifically refused. He wanted a single. His father Kevin has said that the one-way ticket didn't seem particularly strange to him at first, because Andrew had relatives in London he could have stayed with. But none of those relatives had heard from him. None of them had arranged a visit. And the 50 pence cost difference is not the point. The point is that Andrew was old enough to understand what a return ticket was for, and he chose not to have one. At 9:35 that morning, Andrew boarded the train to King's Cross. A fellow passenger remembered him, quiet, absorbed in his PlayStation Portable, keeping to himself for the entire journey. Nothing unusual, nothing visible, just a boy on a train. The train arrived at King's Cross at 11:20. At 11:24, CCTV cameras captured Andrew Gosden leaving the station's main concourse. He walked out through the main entrance, alone, his satchel over one shoulder. He did not look around. He did not hesitate. He walked as though he knew where he was going. That image is the last confirmed record of Andrew Gosden's existence. By 6 that evening, Kevin and Glenys had returned from work. Andrew wasn't home. They assumed he was at a friend's house, or absorbed in something in his room. When dinner was ready and he didn't come out, Kevin went to check. The school blazer and tie were on the chair. The uniform trousers were in the wash. Andrew was gone. They called his friends. None of them had seen him. One of them said something that shifted the temperature in the room. Andrew hadn't been at school that day at all. The teachers had tried to call that morning when Andrew failed to show. But somewhere in the school register, the family's phone number had been transcribed incorrectly. The call went to the wrong number. Nobody received it. Andrew's absence was not reported to Kevin or Glenys until they discovered it themselves, hours later, in the dark of a Friday evening. By 9 that night, the family filed a missing person report with the police. Kevin retraced the walk to school. He found nothing. Over that weekend, the family worked phones and streets simultaneously. They called hospitals, they called railway stations, they called every person they could think of. Andrew's father drove to Whitby, a seaside town the family loved and where Andrew might plausibly have gone, and walked the streets asking strangers if they had seen his son. They had not. It was not until the family specifically asked about train travel that the investigation shifted. The employee at Doncaster railway station who had sold Andrew his ticket came forward. She described the interaction precisely. The young boy, the refusal of the return ticket, the departure time. She was certain. The focus of the search moved to London. British Transport Police and the Metropolitan Police were notified. Andrew, Gosden was declared a missing person nationwide. What followed was an investigation that the Gosden family would later describe as slow, chaotic, and disorganized. Not because the officers lacked intent, but because of a set of compounding failures that, taken together, created a gap in the record that could never be closed. King's Cross Station is one of the busiest transport hubs in the United Kingdom. Approximately 300,000 passengers pass through it every day. The task of reviewing CCTV footage from the 14th of September was assigned to British Transport Police. Finding one 14-year-old in that volume of footage was not straightforward. It took 27 days. By the time officers identified Andrew leaving the main concourse at 11:24, they had found the last confirmed image of him, but had lost almost everything surrounding it. London's surveillance infrastructure is dense. The average person in the city is captured on CCTV up to 300 times per day, according to some estimates, but that footage is not held indefinitely. Recordings are kept for a fixed number of days before being overwritten. By the time investigators requested footage from the bus stops, tube stations, and street cameras surrounding King's Cross, it was gone. All of it. The window had closed. The CCTV failure was not a conspiracy. It was not negligence in the simple sense. It was the mechanical consequence of a system that was not designed for retrospective investigation and a response timeline that did not move quickly enough to outrun it. Andrew Gosden vanished into the most surveilled city in the world and left almost no trace, not because the cameras weren't there, but because no one asked to see them in time. That is the first of several moments in this investigation where you can feel, very precisely, the shape of the gap between what was possible and what actually happened. The psychological profiling section of any case like this requires a framework. And the framework I want to use here is not the one that has dominated most public discussion of Andrew Gosden. Most analysis of this case focuses outward. Who did he meet? Was he groomed? Was he trafficked? Was he abducted? Those are legitimate questions, and we will address every one of them. But the psychological spine of this investigation runs inward first, because before we can understand what happened to Andrew after he left King's Cross, we need to understand what was already happening to Andrew before he ever got on that train. Andrew Gosden was, by every measure available to us, a child experiencing a particular and under-discussed form of psychological isolation. Not the isolation of the neglected or the abused, the isolation of the exceptional. He was in the top 5% of students in England. He found school trivially easy. He sat in classrooms learning things he had already understood months before the teacher introduced them. His peer group, however warm or well-meaning, operated at a different intellectual frequency. He had a small circle of friends, but described them as few. He attended scouts and church, and then quietly stopped going to both, citing boredom, a word that deserves more attention than it typically receives in case discussions. Boredom, in a child of Andrew's profile, is rarely just boredom. It is the experience of environments that fail to meet a need. Andrew kept going to places until they stopped giving him anything, and then he stopped going. This is a consistent pattern. Scouts stopped. Church stopped. School itself was becoming increasingly insufficient. Then, the summer of 2007, something changed. He went to Cambridge. He spent 2 weeks in a residential program surrounded by students who were, for the first time in his life, intellectual peers. He came home different, more alive. His father noticed it immediately. This matters enormously. Because what Cambridge represented was not just academic stimulation. It was the experience of belonging at a level Andrew had not previously encountered. The experience of being understood without having to explain himself. The experience of a world that was bigger and more interesting and more suited to who he actually was than the one he went back to. He returned to Doncaster, to the same school, the same bus ride, the same Year 10 timetable, the same gap between who he was and where he was. And 6 weeks later, he got on a train. The connection between those two events has been discussed in passing in online forums, but it has not been examined with the seriousness it deserves. Because what we are looking at here is not a boy who spontaneously decided to disappear. We are looking at a boy who had been building towards something. We just don't know what. The online forum post attributed to a student who identified herself as Bex, writing on a message board run by British music magazine, Kerrang, claimed that Andrew was bullied at school, that he was singled out, that he only had a couple of friends, that people wondered why he ran away. This account has never been verified and cannot be confirmed, but it sits uncomfortably alongside the official narrative that Andrew was happy, well-adjusted, and without problems, because official narratives are constructed from what adults can see, and Andrew Gosden was, by every account, exceptionally good at not showing what was happening inside. His father put it this way: if Andrew was unhappy or suffering from a mental illness, he did an amazing job of hiding it. That sentence is not reassurance. It is a warning. And it is a warning that applies to every conversation about what Andrew was carrying that morning. Now, I want to return to the one-way ticket, because I said earlier that we would come back to it, and the time has come. Most discussions of the one-way ticket frame it as evidence of intent. That Andrew was not planning to return. That whatever he was going to do in London was permanent. And that framing is not unreasonable. But I want to offer an alternative that the evidence also supports. There is a scenario in which Andrew bought a one-way ticket not because he was planning a final departure, but because someone else had told him he wouldn't need a return. Someone who had offered to bring him home. This is the possibility that has haunted this case since the beginning. Not because there is evidence for it. There isn't. But because it is the scenario that makes the most behavioral sense given everything else we know about Andrew Gosden. He took his keys. If you are not coming back, keys are weight you don't need. He took only £200, leaving the birthday money behind, as though he expected to be home before the extra cash was relevant. He did not take a change of clothes, which suggests either a day trip or the assumption that everything he needed would be provided. He left the PSP charger, consistent with a trip long enough to need the console, but short enough that running out of battery was not a concern. He left his jacket, consistent with being told he would be spending the day somewhere warm or would be driven home before dark. Every item he took and every item he left behind is consistent with a boy who believed this was going to be a day out, not a disappearance. A boy who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that he would be back by evening and that someone else was handling the logistics. If that is the scenario, then the question is not why Andrew left without planning to return. It is who told him he wouldn't need to plan. And that question leads us somewhere the investigation reached relatively early, and then, for reasons we will examine closely, failed to fully pursue. Drop the words "one way" in the comments right now. Because this is the detail that changes everything else, and I want to know you're still with me here. We are about to go somewhere that most coverage of this case has never gone. Before we get to what police did and did not do, I want to establish something about the scale of what Andrew stepped into when he walked out of King's Cross. London in September 2007 was not a city that made it easy to be 14 and alone. The central area around King's Cross at 11 in the morning on a Friday would have been dense with commuters, tourists, school groups, delivery workers, and the invisible population of people who use major transport hubs as sheltered places to exist. Andrew had no phone. He could not be located by signal. He had no bank card transaction history beyond the £200 in his wallet. He had no digital presence of any kind. He was, to every system designed to find missing people, essentially transparent. This is the paradox of the King's Cross CCTV image. It is the most detailed piece of evidence in the entire case, and it tells us almost nothing. We see him leaving the station. We do not see where he turned. We do not see who, if anyone, was waiting for him. We do not see his face in the moment of recognition or confusion or relief or fear that would tell us whether what came next was expected or unexpected. We have a silhouette walking into a crowd, and then the crowd closes behind him, and he is gone. Police procedure in cases of missing children begins, almost universally, at home. This is not malpractice. It is statistical common sense. The majority of missing children are found within miles of where they were last seen. The vast majority of cases involving harm to a child involve someone within the child's immediate circle. When Andrew Gosden was reported missing on the evening of the 14th, South Yorkshire Police did exactly what training and protocol required. They looked inward. Kevin Gosden was interviewed extensively. His movements on the 14th were scrutinized. The family home was searched. Kevin later described this period as the worst of his life, not simply because of the grief of his son being missing, but because he understood why the police were looking at him and found that understanding unbearable. He cooperated. He answered every question. He opened every door. And eventually, as the evidence made clear, police shifted their focus outward. Kevin Gosden was eliminated. The family was eliminated. No evidence of any kind linked anyone in the Gosden household to Andrew's disappearance. But here is what that investigative inward focus cost. In the earliest days of Andrew's disappearance, when CCTV footage was still available, when witnesses' memories were still fresh, when the London that Andrew walked into on the 14th was still, in some meaningful sense, recoverable, the primary investigative resource was directed at a family that had done nothing. The golden hours of a missing person investigation. The first 24 to 72 hours, when evidence is most intact and most accessible, were not spent tracing Andrew's movements through London. They were spent eliminating his father. This is not an accusation of deliberate failure. It is a description of a structural problem. The protocol that directed police attention toward the family was the same protocol that had solved thousands of cases before Andrew Gosden's. It was not wrong in the abstract. In this specific case, it had a cost, and that cost was measured in wiped CCTV footage. By the time investigators identified the image of Andrew at King's Cross 27 days after his disappearance, the footage that would have shown where he went next was gone. The tube station cameras, the bus stop cameras, the street-level cameras in every direction from King's Cross, gone, overwritten by protocol and by time. This is what the investigative failure in this case actually looks like. Not conspiracy, not incompetence in the dramatic sense. Just the quiet, mechanical, inevitable consequence of time passing and resources being directed elsewhere while the clock ran down. Kevin Gosden, speaking years later, described the experience as watching a door close in slow motion and being unable to reach it in time. There were sightings. In any case involving a missing child who has generated significant media coverage, there will always be sightings. Most of them are wrong. Some of them are wishful. A few of them are credible enough that dismissing them feels unconscionable. In the weeks after Andrew vanished, reported sightings came in from across London and beyond. A woman named Philippa, standing in Covent Garden in mid-October, saw a boy who she believed resembled Andrew. She approached him. He denied being Andrew Gosden and moved away. She followed him briefly before losing sight of him near a cafe called the Poetry Place. She reported this to police. She reported it 6 weeks after the encounter. Police followed up 6 weeks after she reported it. The CCTV on the building where she had seen him was not functioning that day. A staff member at the cafe thought she might have seen someone who looked like the description, but acknowledged it could have been any of several teenagers in the area. Nothing was confirmed. The timing problem that destroyed the CCTV evidence destroyed the sighting evidence too. By the time Philippa was interviewed in a meaningful way, 12 weeks had passed since she saw the boy. Memory degrades. Details soften and shift. What had been a strong impression became an uncertain one. A separate sighting placed a boy matching Andrew's description at a Pizza Hut restaurant on Oxford Street, around 30 minutes from King's Cross, close to the time he would have arrived in the city. Kevin Gosden has consistently described this as the most credible early sighting because the behavior described, a quiet, solitary boy sitting alone and keeping to himself, maps directly onto Andrew's known mannerisms. But again, CCTV from the restaurant was gone. No other customers came forward. It remains unconfirmed. A third sighting reported a boy matching Andrew sleeping rough near the South Bank. The vagueness of the description and the absence of any corroborating evidence meant it could not be followed up with any precision. What these three sightings share is not their content, it is their shape. Each one came in too late. Each one was acted upon too slowly. Each one, by the time investigators reached it, had become an echo rather than a lead. Kevin Gosden described these lost leads as the most painful what-if moments of the entire investigation. There is a fourth sighting worth discussing separately. In November 2008, over a year after Andrew disappeared, a man walked into a police station in Leominster, a small market town roughly 150 miles from London. He announced himself through the intercom outside and said he had information about Andrew Gosden. An officer was dispatched to take the details. By the time the officer arrived at the reception area, the man was gone. Shortly afterwards, an anonymous letter arrived at the BBC. The author claimed to be the man who had left the Leominster station. He said Andrew had been seen in Shrewsbury, a town roughly 150 miles northwest of London, and that he had seen him there on multiple occasions. Police were unable to verify the claim. They could not confirm that the letter writer and the man at the station were the same person. The Gosden family were left with what Kevin described as a new form of subtle torture, information credible enough to be agonizing and unverifiable enough to be useless. This is the pattern of this case, not the absence of information. The presence of information too degraded, too delayed, or too anonymous to act upon. The concerts. We cannot move forward without addressing the concerts, because this is where the most plausible of the theories about Andrew's specific motivation for the 14th of September is anchored. London, in the week of the 14th of September 2007, was hosting several events that would have been deeply meaningful to Andrew Gosden. American rock band 30 Seconds to Mars were playing at Brixton Academy that Friday night. A prog metal band called Six were playing at the O2 Academy in Islington, approximately a 15-minute walk from King's Cross, in what would be the last show featuring their original singer. Finnish rock band Him, one of Andrew's favorite acts, were scheduled for an in-store signing at an HMV record store 3 days later. The Gosden family have never dismissed the concert theory. They have actively pursued it. In subsequent years, Kevin Gosden attended concerts by bands he thought Andrew might follow, distributing missing person flyers at the doors and scanning faces in the crowds. Missing person posters were displayed at a Slipknot meet and greet event in 2020. The family staged appeals outside music venues, asking people to check old photographs from gigs in September 2007. Those appeals produced one notable result. A photograph from a 30 Seconds to Mars concert that week showed a figure in the crowd who bore a resemblance to Andrew. The image circulated online. Some who examined it were convinced. Others were not. Kevin Gosden himself described finding it heartbreaking rather than conclusive. The figure in the photograph is a teenage boy with the kind of face, the kind of hair, the kind of frame that belongs to a significant number of 14-year-old boys in England in 2007. Nothing in the photograph could definitively confirm or deny that it was Andrew. But the concert theory does something important. It provides a reason for the one-way ticket that does not require Andrew to have been planning something permanent. If someone promised him a ride home after the show, he wouldn't need a return. If someone told him the evening would be long and offered accommodation, he would have left his jacket at home with the reasonable expectation that he wouldn't need it. If someone met him at or near King's Cross, that would explain why he walked out of the station without looking around, without hesitating, without the behavior of someone alone and uncertain in a city. He walked out as though he knew where he was going, because he might have known exactly where he was going. There is something else the concert theory unlocks. Andrew was wearing a Slipknot t-shirt. He had chosen that shirt that morning, specifically from whatever was in his wardrobe. When you are going to school, you wear your uniform. When you are going somewhere that matters to you, you wear the thing that says who you are. The Slipknot shirt was not casual. It was a statement. It was Andrew Gosden presenting himself to the world he wanted to be part of, not the world he was leaving behind. His satchel covered in band patches was the same. Charlotte had helped him sew those patches on. Every patch was a decision, a deliberate addition to a portable declaration of identity. Andrew carried that satchel everywhere. It was the most visible thing about him, more identifying even than his glasses, because it was chosen rather than necessitated. And on the morning he disappeared, he made sure to have it with him. These are small details, but in the behavioral analysis of a missing person case, the question of what someone chose to take is one of the most revealing questions available. Andrew took the things that were part of his identity: the satchel, the t-shirt, the PSP, his primary mode of entertainment, and one of his few connections to a wider world. He did not take the things associated with obligation or routine. He did not take his school books. He did not take his uniform. He did not take the charger that would have extended the life of the one device he clearly intended to use. He packed like someone going to a place where he wanted to be seen as himself and expected to be back before the battery ran out. There is one more thing worth noting about the concert specifically, and it bears directly on the question of whether Andrew was alone that day. The Six show at the O2 Academy in Islington was a significant event in its own right. It was the final performance featuring the band's original vocalist, the kind of farewell show that music communities converge on. The venue was roughly a 15-minute walk from King's Cross. If Andrew had tickets, or if someone else had tickets and had brought Andrew along, the geography of his arrival at King's Cross places him almost exactly as far from that venue as you would be if you stepped off a train from Doncaster and started walking. No bus required. No tube fare. Just 15 minutes on foot through the streets Andrew had visited with his family enough times that he knew them. This is not proof of anything, but it is the kind of detail that makes the concert theory feel less like a guess and more like a reading of the available map. The question we cannot answer, and the one that will carry us into the second half of this investigation, is who was waiting for him. By the end of 2007, Andrew Gosden had been missing for 3 months. The police had eliminated his family. They had lost the CCTV trail. The early sightings had dissolved into uncertainty, and the investigation had reached the kind of suspended state that cold cases settle into. Still open, still technically active, but without a clear direction forward. Kevin Gosden had descended into a darkness that would eventually require hospitalization. In the lead up to Christmas 2007, police asked to question him under caution, not because new evidence had emerged against him, but because the investigation had not moved. And when an investigation does not move, it sometimes turns back on itself. Kevin later said that being questioned under caution while his son was missing and potentially in danger was the point at which something broke inside him. He had been cooperating fully. He had been doing everything asked of him. And still, the police's gaze kept returning to him. One day before Christmas, the family's vicar and close friend Alan Murray came to the Gosden house with food. As he approached, he heard a noise from inside. He let himself in with a spare key. He found Kevin Gosden hanging from the upstairs balustrade. Alan Murray cut him down. Kevin was rushed to hospital. It took 7 hours for him to regain consciousness. He spent the following months in a mental health facility. He survived. He recovered, partially and incompletely, in the way that grief of this particular kind, the ambiguous, unresolvable kind, allows for partial recovery. He continued. He built a website. He appeared on television. He visited London. He attended concerts. He kept looking. But the investigation, in those first critical months, had done something that could not be undone. It had consumed the father while the trail went cold. And the trail went cold in a city of 8 million people, on a September morning when the cameras were running and the footage was there, and nobody looked at it in time. South Yorkshire police treated Andrew's disappearance as high priority from the beginning. He was designated a high-risk missing person immediately, not a runaway being left to come home on his own terms. Officers were assigned specifically to the London inquiry. Kevin Gosden, for all his justified criticism of the investigation's pace and direction, was cleared thoroughly and treated with eventual sensitivity once the initial protocol period passed. The Metropolitan Police were notified. British Transport Police reviewed hundreds of hours of King's Cross footage and found the image. Inquiries were made with every person in Andrew's life: teachers, friends, scout leaders, church members, the staff of the Cambridge Summer School, relatives in London. Every known device was forensically examined. Not one of those examinations produced a lead, which is itself a finding. The absence of digital contact is as significant as its presence would have been. Here is what that absence tells us. Andrew Gosden, in September 2007, had no secret communications, no grooming trail, no older contact, no arrangement made in the dark recesses of a platform he kept hidden from his family. If someone persuaded Andrew to take that train, they did it in person. They did it in a space that left no record. They did it through a relationship that existed entirely offline and entirely outside the view of anyone who knew him. This narrows the field considerably, and it points to a specific profile of encounter, not the anonymous internet predator that dominates public imagination in these discussions. Something slower, something that would have required physical proximity. Something that left Andrew knowing where he was going and trusting the destination enough to get on a train without telling anyone. That profile is harder to investigate than an online grooming trail. It produces no digital record. It cannot be traced through a server or an IP address or a username. It exists only in the memories of whoever was there, and in the documented pattern of Andrew's own movements and behaviors in the months before he disappeared. Investigators followed every physical lead available to them. The summer school, the scout troop, the church, the school. The long walks to school in the new academic year. Every place Andrew had been that might have put him in contact with someone outside his immediate circle. Nothing actionable emerged. But the absence of actionable evidence is not the same as the absence of a connection. It is the absence of a connection that could be found. There are 4 serious theories about what happened to Andrew after he left King's Cross. Not rumors, not online speculation. 4 scenarios, each supported by some element of the documented record, each undermined by some element of the same record. We will take them one at a time. The first theory is voluntary disappearance. That Andrew went to London that morning intending to leave his life behind and start something new. The evidence used to support this theory includes the one-way ticket, the withdrawal of almost his entire savings, the fact that he left his school uniform at home, and his known interest in themes of escape, the Reginald Perrin sitcom, the Nietzsche, the desire for something more challenging than what his life currently offered. The evidence against this theory is significant and, in aggregate, heavy. Andrew left his birthday money in the drawer. He left the emergency cash box untouched. He did not take a change of clothes. He did not take a passport. He did not take the charger for the only device he brought. He had no email address, no social media, no digital identity that would allow him to navigate an independent life. At 14, he looked closer to 12. He could not have secured legitimate work or housing. He had never spent a night away from home that wasn't arranged by his parents or the gifted program. His family described him as the opposite of street smart, a phrase that appears in multiple accounts. And he always, without exception, left notes. The voluntary disappearance theory also requires Andrew to have sustained his disappearance for 17 years without a single confirmed contact with anyone who knew him. In an era of facial recognition, social media, digital banking requirements, and national health systems that require identity, the idea of a 30-year-old man living in England without ever generating a verifiable record is not impossible, but it is vanishingly unlikely. Kevin Gosden eventually articulated this directly. He found it impossible to believe that Andrew would allow the family to suffer for this long without at least a signal that he was alive. The voluntary disappearance theory is not impossible. It is the theory that requires the most extraordinary circumstances to remain coherent, and the evidence does not support it as a primary explanation. The second theory is suicide, that Andrew traveled to London to spend a final day doing things he loved before ending his life. and that his body entered the Thames or another body of water and was not recovered. This theory has specific emotional logic. It accounts for the one-way ticket. It accounts for the absence of a change of clothes. It accounts for the fact that he didn't take the birthday money. If you are not coming back, extra cash has no value. It accounts for the leaving of the PSP charger, and it is consistent with a profile of internal suffering that nobody around Andrew could access because Andrew was profoundly skilled at not showing it. The evidence against this theory is the absence of a body. The Thames was partially searched using sonar technology in 2011. A section of approximately 7 miles was scanned from Teddington Weir to Tower Bridge. Investigators found a sunken boat, an overturned car, and an unidentified body. Not Andrew. The search found remains, but not the remains anyone was looking for. The Thames is not a sealed container. Bodies surface. They have done so consistently throughout the documented history of the river. The complete absence of any confirmed remains is difficult to reconcile with a Thames drowning, though not impossible. The suicide theory is also undermined as a primary explanation by the pattern of what Andrew took with him. His family insists that the taking of his keys is the detail that makes suicide implausible as the primary motivation. If you have no intention of returning, you do not need your keys. Andrew took his keys. His family believe this means he intended to come home. It is, at minimum, a counterweight to the theory that the day was designed to end permanently. The third theory is misadventure or accidental death. That Andrew arrived in London, spent part of the day exploring, and died by accident. A fall, a drowning, a confrontation that escalated unexpectedly, a robbery gone wrong. This theory has the virtue of requiring no premeditation. It requires only that a 14-year-old boy who was not street smart found himself in a situation he could not navigate, and that the situation ended badly before anyone who might have helped him understood what was happening. This theory, like the suicide theory, struggles against the absence of remains. Accidental deaths generate witnesses, investigations, unidentified bodies, hospital admissions, coroner's records. Police explicitly checked all of these in the years following Andrew's disappearance. They found no unidentified remains matching his description. No unidentified hospital admissions, no coroner's case that could plausibly be him. The absence of a record is the persistent wall in this investigation. Andrew is not provably dead. He is not provably alive. He generated no exit from the world that any system designed to record exits was able to find. Which brings us to the fourth theory, the one that the arrests of 2021 forced into public view. That Andrew Gosden was the target of a predatory individual or network. That he was lured to London or arrived there by his own choice and was identified and targeted after arrival. That what happened to him after he left King's Cross involved the deliberate intent of at least one other person. That he was harmed or held or trafficked or killed, not by accident or by his own hand, but because someone made a decision to harm him. This is the theory that the Gosden family have lived with longest and feared most. It is also the theory that received formal legal recognition in December 2021. On Wednesday, the 8th of December 2021, South Yorkshire police arrested 2 men in London. They were 45 and 38 years old respectively. They were taken into custody on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking in connection with Andrew Gosden's disappearance. The older of the 2 men also faced a separate allegation of possessing indecent images of children, unrelated to Andrew's case. Both men were released under investigation while electronic devices seized from them underwent comprehensive forensic review. Police stated publicly that a full review of the devices could take up to a year. The Gosden family were kept closely informed. They were asked to maintain their privacy while inquiries continued. For nearly 2 years, the investigation ran. For the first time in 14 years, there was something concrete. 2 names, 2 addresses, 2 sets of devices being examined by forensic specialists. In September 2023, South Yorkshire Police announced that the 2 men had been eliminated from the investigation. A spokesperson confirmed that officers were confident the two men played no part in Andrew's disappearance, and that the investigation remained open and active. This is the statement that requires the most careful reading of any official statement in this case. The phrase "confident they played no part" is precise and deliberate. It does not mean the men were innocent of everything. The older suspects still face the separate allegation regarding indecent images. It does not mean the investigation's direction was wrong. It means that the specific evidence recovered from their devices did not link them to Andrew. That is a meaningful distinction. Forensic review of their devices did not produce Andrew's image, Andrew's communications, Andrew's identifying information, or any record of contact with him. What the arrests confirmed, though, was that South Yorkshire police had, at some point before December 2021, developed enough specific intelligence to apply to a court for arrest warrants in connection with a 14-year disappearance. That is not nothing. Arrest warrants are not issued on hunches. They are issued on documented probable cause. Someone, at some point, provided information specific enough to point investigators at two particular men in London. The elimination of those men does not eliminate the information that produced the warrants. It only means those two men were not the answer. The investigation remains open. The information that generated the 2021 arrests still exists somewhere in the case file. Now, we need to talk about Andy Rue. In the autumn of 2017, 10 years after Andrew vanished, a man who has been given the pseudonym Michael Dixon was chatting online with a young man whose username was Andy Rue. Andy Rue said he needed help. His partner had just left him. He needed £200 to pay his rent. He claimed he didn't have a bank account. He explained that he had left home at the age of 14. When asked why, he said he just felt like it. Michael Dixon had followed the Andrew Gosden case. Something about the interaction troubled him. He reached out to the Gosden family. When Kevin Gosden heard the username, he felt something he had not felt for years. When Andrew was a child, his family had a pet name for him, Rue, like the character in Winnie the Pooh, a small, bouncy creature, full of energy and warmth. The name was used within the family. It was not in the public record. Kevin notified police. An investigation was launched. The Gosden family drove to Lincoln, the city where Andy Rue was listed as living, and distributed thousands of missing person leaflets. 4 possible sightings were reported. None were confirmed. Police contacted the website where the exchange had taken place. The site's administrators had recently upgraded their systems. In the process, large quantities of user data had been purged. The account belonging to Andy Rue could not be traced. The IP address that created it no longer existed in the database. The investigation produced nothing that could be verified. There are 2 readings of the Andy Rue encounter. The first is that it was exactly what it looked like. Someone who had followed the Andrew Gosden case closely enough to know the family nickname, either through private knowledge or through obscure forum posts that predate the case's mainstream visibility, and who constructed a scenario designed to attract attention or extract money. The details were almost too precise. The £200, the username, the age of departure. Together, they suggest either that this was Andrew Gosden or that it was someone who had assembled these specific facts with deliberate intent. The second reading, the one Kevin Gosden allowed himself to hold for the duration of the inquiry, was that it was genuinely Andrew. A 30-year-old man living under a different identity who had found a way to reach out that was indirect enough to be deniable but specific enough to be meaningful to his family and nobody else. Who needed help but could not ask for it directly. Who knew that the family nickname was a signal no one outside the household would understand. Here is what is specific about the nickname. Rue, as in kangaroo, a small, bouncing, energetic creature. It was a private name. It was used within the family. The documentary record of the Andrew Gosden case, the news reports, the police statements, the charity campaign pages, the television appeals, none of them contain that nickname. It does not appear in the public record before the Andy Rue incident was reported. If someone fabricated the Andy Rue contact to simulate Andrew, they needed that nickname. And to have it, They needed access to the Gosden family or to information the Gosden family had never made public. That fact has never been fully resolved. The website data was purged before the question could be answered. The contact ended. The lead dissolved into the same ambiguity that every other lead in this case has dissolved into. Kevin Gosden has described the experience of not knowing as an endless cycle of horror. He found himself, he admitted this publicly and with visible shame, envious of parents whose children had been murdered. Because those parents had an ending, a terrible one, but an ending. Kevin had no ending. He had a morning. The morning of the 14th of September 2007. And then nothing. Just the morning, endlessly returned to, never resolved. Glenys Gosden described it differently. She said it was like someone coming up to you and sticking a knife in your guts. Normally that would hurt, but the knife would be removed and the wound would heal. With this, someone stuck the knife in and you had to keep walking around with it. Always there, always hurting. Getting twisted, frequently, without warning, by a sighting or a lead or a name on a chat platform or a photograph in a crowd. These are the precise descriptions of ambiguous loss, a documented psychological experience distinct from grief, distinct from mourning, distinct from the resolution that even the most devastating confirmed death eventually allows. It does not resolve. It does not plateau. It simply continues, indefinitely, for as long as the question remains open. The question remains open. There is a dimension of this investigation that has received less attention than it deserves, and it concerns the specific failure mode of how this case was classified in its earliest stages. When Andrew was reported missing on the evening of the 14th, South Yorkshire Police did classify him as high risk and vulnerable. That classification was correct, but the investigative actions that followed that classification were oriented primarily toward the domestic environment, toward the family, toward the question of why Andrew had left home. Kevin Gosden later described this explicitly. He felt that police remained focused on uncovering the reason Andrew had left, rather than on what happened to him after he arrived in London. That distinction matters enormously. In missing person psychology, there is a documented phenomenon known as investigative anchoring. It occurs when early assumptions about the nature of a disappearance shape the direction and intensity of the investigation in ways that become self-reinforcing. If investigators begin with the assumption that a child is a runaway, they direct resources toward the runaway hypothesis. They interview family. They check known hangout locations. They monitor the local area. What they do not do, with the same urgency, is treat the city the child traveled to as an active crime scene. Andrew Gosden traveled to London. London was the last place he was confirmed alive. By any reasonable forensic logic, London was the primary scene of whatever happened next, and London's evidence was gone before. London received the investigative attention it required. This is the anchoring failure. Not a failure of intent, not a failure of care, a failure of cognitive frame, the assumption that Andrew left for reasons that could be found in Doncaster when the answer, whatever it is, was always in London. The CCTV failure is not only a logistical failure, it is the consequence of an anchoring failure. If investigators had treated Andrew's arrival in London as the primary scene from day one, footage requests would have gone out within hours. While the recording windows were still open, the trail would not have been complete. King's Cross is too large and too complex for that. But there would have been something, a direction, a turn, a face in a crowd responding to a 14-year-old boy in a Slipknot t-shirt. There is nothing. Because the frame was wrong, and by the time the frame corrected itself, the opportunity was gone. The fourth theory, foul play and third-party involvement, also has to contend with the complete absence of any physical trace of Andrew after King's Cross. No body, no belongings, no clothing, no bag. Nothing with his fingerprints on it. Nothing that could be identified as his. In cases of abduction and murder, even where a perpetrator takes extraordinary precautions, traces emerge. The perpetrator keeps something. The victim leaves something. Forensic transfer happens. Andrew Gosden left no trace of any kind in the documented record. This is either evidence of extraordinary deliberateness on the part of whoever harmed him, or it is evidence that what happened to Andrew did not happen in the way the abduction and murder scenario typically requires. Every theory in this case is undermined by something. That is not a characteristic of a poorly investigated case. It is a characteristic of a case where the primary evidence, whatever happened between 11:24 on the 14th of September and the moment Andrew's presence in the world became unverifiable, was never recovered. That evidence may not exist anymore in any recoverable form, or it may be sitting in a file somewhere, in someone's memory, in a photograph taken at a concert 17 years ago and never examined by anyone who knew what to look for. The investigation did not stop when the early leads went cold. It contracted, as cold case investigations do, and it lost resources over time. But it continued. The BBC's Missing Live program in 2011 gave the case national visibility. Crime Watch revisited it in 2020. Age progression images circulated through the Missing People charity's Find Every Child campaign, appearing in hospitals, GP surgeries, bus stations, shopping centers, and on refuse collection trucks across South Yorkshire. Kevin Gosden attended concerts by bands he thought Andrew might follow, distributing missing person flyers at venue doors, scanning every face in every crowd for a version of the face he last saw. In 2007, he handed out leaflets at a Slipknot meet and greet in 2020, where Andrew's poster was displayed alongside the band's merchandise. The band's guitarist, Mick Thompson, stood beside the poster. No new leads came from it. In 2015, the Metropolitan Police began deploying what became known as super recognizers, individuals with statistically exceptional ability to identify faces in crowded or degraded imagery. Police appealed for anyone who had attended concerts in London during the weekend of the 14th to come forward with photographs and video from those events. The super recognizers would scan them for anyone resembling Andrew. That process produced the photograph from the 30 Seconds to Mars show. Nothing conclusive. The forensic work continued at a pace dictated by the total absence of new primary evidence. Investigators periodically revisited the case files, the original CCTV image, the sighting reports, the family interview records, looking for anything that might have been missed or reassessed in light of new analytical techniques. Each review produced no actionable development until December 2021. The arrests, when they came, were significant not merely because of what they potentially revealed, but because of what they confirmed about the investigation's orientation. By 2021, South Yorkshire police were not treating Andrew's disappearance as a probable suicide or a voluntary runaway case. They were treating it as a probable criminal matter. The arrests were made on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking. These are specific charges with specific legal thresholds. The fact that the warrants were issued means the threshold was met. The threshold was not met on the basis of public information. It was met on the basis of intelligence developed by the investigation over 14 years. That intelligence came from somewhere. It pointed to specific individuals in London. It was specific enough to support warrant applications before a court. The 2 men were released. They were eliminated. But the intelligence that produced the warrant still exists in the case file. The informant or informants who provided it are presumably known to police. Whatever they said that pointed to those 2 men pointed away from them when forensic review was complete. It may still point somewhere. The investigation remains open. The active word in that sentence is not open. It is remains. By the time Andrew Gosden had been missing for a year, 122 unconfirmed sightings had been reported from across the United Kingdom. A church service was held in London on the anniversary. Kevin and Glenys wrote an open letter to their son and published it. It read, "We do not care where you have been or what lifestyle you choose for yourself. We only want to know that you are safe. We remain as proud of you as we have always been." In 2009, a computer-generated age progression image was created showing what Andrew might look like in his mid-20s. A second set was created for the 10-year anniversary in 2017. A third set circulated on social media with facial recognition appeals, focusing on the double ridge on Andrew's upper right ear, the one anatomical feature that could not be changed by time or intention. In 2011, Kevin had his son's case highlighted on BBC's Missing Live. The response prompted the anonymous man to enter and exit Leominster police station within the span of a single afternoon. In 2017, police issued a specific appeal to medical professionals. If anyone had treated a young man in his mid-20s with no medical records from the preceding decade, with no registered GP, with no documented history, please come forward. The appeal was extended to opticians because Andrew relied on strong prescription glasses, and the assumption was that if he was alive, he would at minimum have sought optical care at some point. No responses were generated that led anywhere. Kevin Gosden became an ambassador for the charity Missing People. He has spent years educating parents about how to talk to their children, how to create conditions in which a child who is thinking about running away, or who has run away, knows that home is still a possibility. He has spoken at schools. He has given interviews. He has maintained a blog. He has kept Andrew's case in the public consciousness with a consistency and dedication that, 17 years on, still has the quality of a father who has not given up. Andrew's room at the family home has been repainted and redecorated, but his favorite t-shirts are still in a drawer. His gem collection is still on the shelf. The family has never changed the locks, just in case. Let me now offer the analytical synthesis that this investigation demands, because 17 years of facts deserve more than a list of unresolved questions. The psychological spine of this case is subject psychology. It is Andrew, what he was carrying, what he needed, what he could not say. The investigation's failures are real, but they are secondary to the primary anomaly, which is the interior world of a 14-year-old boy that was rich enough and private enough and unwitnessed enough that the people closest to him had no idea anything was happening until the morning it was over. Andrew was not a mystery to the people who loved him. He was a known quantity, brilliant, reserved, gentle, considerate. They knew the surface comprehensively. The depth they did not have access to, and the depth is where everything actually happened. The depth contained a growing frustration with a world that was too small for his intelligence. A summer at Cambridge that showed him something his life was not. A return to routine that felt different after that showing. Interests in philosophy that centered on individual freedom and the rejection of conventional paths. A taste in music and literature that ran toward themes of transformation, escape, and the courage to become something other than what you were expected to be. And something else, something unconfirmed, that may or may not have involved a connection to another person. The connection theory. I want to be precise about what the evidence supports and what it does not. There is no evidence that Andrew was groomed online. Forensic examination of every device he ever used confirmed this. But the absence of online contact does not preclude in-person contact. It only means that whatever relationship, if any, existed between Andrew and someone outside his known circle was conducted without leaving a digital trace. The Cambridge summer school represents the one significant exception to Andrew's social insularity. He spent 2 weeks away from home, in a residential setting, surrounded by intellectual peers and older mentors. He came home different. Nobody who attended the program has ever come forward publicly to describe a specific relationship or encounter. Police made inquiries with the program's administrators and found nothing actionable. But let's hold the possibility carefully. A 14-year-old boy who feels intellectually isolated in his home environment goes away for 2 weeks and, for the first time, encounters a world that feels like a fit. It is not hard to imagine that in that environment, a connection could form. Not necessarily a predatory one, not necessarily one the other party intended to be harmful, but a connection that meant something to Andrew, that he kept privately, that provided enough of a reason to get on a train 6 weeks later to wherever that connection led. I am not asserting that this happened. I am asserting that the evidence neither confirms nor excludes it, and that it represents the most behaviorally coherent explanation for the one piece of this case that has never been satisfactorily explained. Why London? Why that day? Why with such apparent purposefulness? He walked out of that station as though he knew where he was going. There is a version of that image that is unbearable and a version that is almost peaceful. In the unbearable version, he is walking towards something he does not understand and cannot escape. In the peaceful version, he is walking towards something he chose, something he wanted. A day that was entirely and finally his. In a city he loved, among the things and the sounds and the possibilities that his life in Doncaster could not give him. Both versions end the same way. He does not come back. But the difference between them is the difference between a boy who was failed and a boy who was, in the last hours we can account for, doing exactly what he wanted to do. We do not know which version is true. That not knowing is the case. That not knowing is what Kevin and Glenys Gosden have lived inside for 17 years. That not knowing is what every investigation since September 2007 has been trying to resolve and has not been able to. There is a modern parallel that gives the Andrew Gosden case context beyond its own particular tragedy. In the United Kingdom, approximately 70,000 children under the age of 16 run away or go missing every year. The vast majority, around 80%, are found within 24 hours, 91% within 2 days. Andrew Gosden is in the remaining fraction, the 2%. The approximately 3,000 people in the United Kingdom who, at any given time, have been missing for more than 10 years. Most of the people in that 2% are adults who have chosen to disappear. A smaller number are victims of violence whose cases remain unsolved. An even smaller number are genuinely unknown. Cases like Andrew's, where the outcome is unconfirmed, where the exit from the world could not be verified, where every theory remains open. The specific system failure this case exposes is not the failure of individual officers or investigators. It is the failure of a protocol architecture that was designed around the statistical majority and was not equipped for the statistical exception. The protocol said, look at the family first. Statistically correct. In this case, wrong. The protocol said, CCTV footage does not need to be requested proactively, statistically acceptable. In this case, catastrophic. What Andrew Gosden's case forced onto the agenda of missing persons policy in the United Kingdom was the question of timeline. The question of what happens in the gap between when a child goes missing and when the family is able to direct a search toward where the child actually went. That gap in his case was 27 days. 27 days during which the city that swallowed him continued to function, override its cameras, and give nothing back. On the 10th of July 2023, Andrew Gosden would have turned 30 years old. He had by that point been missing for longer than he was alive. Kevin Gosden has continued to nurture the acorn seedlings that he and Andrew planted together when Andrew was 10 years old. One of them grew into a miniature oak tree in the back garden. By Andrew's 30th birthday, it stood at 6 feet tall and had begun producing acorns of its own. Kevin wrote on his blog, as Andrew's oak tree bears the fruit of the acorn, we hope that awareness of his case bears the fruit that others are helped to find positive solutions in their lives, and that other families are spared the pain that too many of us live with every day. That sentence deserves to be held for a moment. Kevin Gosden, a man who has spent 17 years in the specific hell of not knowing, who attempted to take his own life in the first year of his son's absence, who has described the experience as a knife permanently lodged in his body, turned the pain into a practice. He became an ambassador. He educated people. He kept speaking. He kept showing up. There is something here about what adults fail to see. Something about the gap between the life a child presents to the world and the life that child is actually living. Andrew Gosden's family were not negligent. They were not absent. They were not cruel. They were, by every available account, exactly the kind of parents a child is supposed to have. And they still did not know. The gap between the life Andrew showed them and whatever was happening underneath it was not a product of their failure. It was a product of who Andrew was, a deeply private, deeply internal person who processed his world inwardly and revealed only what he chose to reveal. That is not pathology. It is a kind of personality that exists in abundance. that we encounter in our families, in our schools, in our communities every day, and that we systematically underestimate because we have no instrument for measuring the depth of a silence. The lesson this case offers, if it offers one, is not about surveillance or investigation or protocol. It is about presence, about the specific discipline of noticing what is not being said alongside what is, about creating conditions in which the internal world of a quiet child has somewhere to go. Kevin Gosden has said that what haunts him most is not what he didn't know. It is the possibility that Andrew had something he didn't feel he could tell him. That's why I implore all parents, talk to your children. Let them know they can tell you anything. The oak tree in the Gosden garden is still growing. Andrew planted the acorn that became it when he was 10 years old. A curious boy who had read that you could grow a miniature oak in a tub and had enlisted his father's help to try it. They gathered the acorns together. They planted them together. And they waited. Andrew's prediction was correct. The acorns sprouted. Kevin tended the seedlings through the years of searching and not finding, through the investigation that gave him nothing, through the Christmas, where a vicar with a spare key cut him down from a balustrade. He kept tending them. He moved one to the back garden. He watched it grow past his knee, then his waist, then his shoulder, then his head. By Andrew's 30th birthday, it was 6 feet tall and carrying acorns of its own. Kevin wrote that he found comfort in that oak tree. Not resolution, not peace. Comfort. The specific kind of comfort that comes from something living continuing forward, regardless of what is known and what is unknown. The tree does not require the question to be answered to grow. It just grows. Andrew Gosden is still missing. The investigation remains open. If you know anything, if you have ever encountered someone who might be Andrew, if you have any information, however small, that might be relevant to this case, please contact South Yorkshire Police or the charity Missing People. Andrew's case page is live. The incident room is active. If you are still here, if this story has stayed with you, if you are sitting with the weight of that 11:24 CCTV image and the boy walking forward and the crowd closing behind him, then you already understand why this channel exists. Because these cases do not end with an arrest or a conviction or a closing statement. They end with an oak tree 6 feet tall in a back garden in Doncaster and a father who never changed the locks. Like this video if Andrew's story deserves to be heard. Subscribe to Cold Case Redacted so you never miss an investigation. And share this with one person who you think would want to know. The more people who carry this case, the better the chance that one of them carries it to the answer the Gosden family have spent 17 years waiting for. Andrew Gosden, born 10th of July, 1993. Last seen 14th of September, 2007, age 14. He would be 32 years old today. He is still missing.